Hi there guys, and welcome to another edition of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Carrying on with the draft review series today, this episode we will be focusing on the AFC East. So I've given my thoughts in a couple of other videos on the draft as a whole. If you want to find those out, I recommend hunting those down and checking them out. Ideally, the review I did after round one on Friday. In general, I thought it was a very interesting draft, especially the first and second rounds, a lot of movement and some real surprises. So really pleased with it this year, had a good time watching. I'm just going to get straight on into this one, and we're going to begin by going through the Buffalo Bills draft. So in the first round, they traded back, initially had the 10th overall pick, traded that to the Chiefs to move back and pick up a first round to next year. Big fan of that move for the Bills. I think this team needs a lot of youth, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Got some players getting older, some that I think might be moving on soon. And there's not a huge amount of depth across this roster. So I think this is a real solid move. At 27, they selected Tre'Davious White, who I think was good value at that position. He certainly could have gone earlier, particularly considering some of the teams drafting around that range were absolutely in need of more defensive back help. I think he was one of the better corner prospects in the draft, certainly could have gone earlier, whilst not a top end talent like they could have got at 10. I feel it gives them someone who can step in, contribute immediately next year, and the fact they've picked up a first round to next year will really help them in the grand scheme of things. So I'm a big fan of this selection. In the second, they've then traded up to go and get Zay Jones, the wide receiver from East Carolina. I think this was outside of the initial three receivers that were taken in the top 10, possibly the best receiver in this draft. Big fan of his. I think it's, again, a really big fan of this pick. I think it's the right range for him. Not sure necessarily about a trade up, but that said, I do think there was a bit of a drop off afterwards. They get someone that can finally, hopefully, issue a compliment to Sammy Watkins. A different type of receiver, a bit more of an all-round physical player. If he can stay healthy, I think he'll be a rock-solid option opposite Watkins. Should help Tyrod Taylor develop a bit more consistency, and I think this is just a real solid pickup for this team. Then we've got Dion Dawkins, who was picked at the end of the second. Was that the end of the second? Either way, this is another very good selection. I think he could have gone a lot higher than this. I've seen some mocks, and I agreed. I think he would have been a decent pickup for some teams at the bottom of the top of the second, or even the end of the first round. Had a few more offensive linemen gone at that juncture. Bills have a need at right tackle. He may be able to play there. I think he might be better suited to guard. It's certainly possible that he ends up playing there at some point whilst he's there. Either way, I think this is a much better player than his draft position may indicate, and I think this is a really, really solid pickup. Beyond that, Nathan Peterman was selected at 171. It's considered a pretty decent backup quarterback prospect, so that's pretty logical. Cardale Jones, I don't think is the most. I don't know if they know what they've got there, so I think Peterman offers a more traditional pocket passer, maybe a more reliable backup option if Cardale Jones ends up not panning out. Matt Milano would pick 163. Not particularly familiar with this guy. They did need some depth in the middle linebacker position, so I believe that makes some sense there. Similar with Tanner Vallejo, linebacker from Boise State. So again, this is another prospect that I think is a draft that position needs. Whether they end up contributing, I'm not so sure. Overall, pretty solid draft for the Bills. Obviously feels less exciting, when you've picked someone at the back end of the first as opposed to the top 10, but I do think in the grand scheme of things that it was a positive trade for the team. The one sort of downside is that they're not going to use the 5th-year option on Sammy Watkins, which I think is likely a mistake. I'm not sure Zay Jones is a true number one type. If Watkins was to, I can understand with the injury issues he's had why they may be reluctant to do so, but I think at the end of the day they traded up to get Sammy Watkins. Gave up quite a lot, and frankly, they don't know you can't say if they're going to be in a position to get someone with a greater talent base than him anytime soon. So I will be fairly critical of them if they end up not retaining Watkins, unless he really falls off, suffers more injuries. But a good draft, getting a first round to next year, as I say, I think that's a great move for them. And I like all of the first 3 picks. I think they addressed needs. I think all 3 of them could potentially be starting, and I think they got some quality at the spots they've drafted at that point. So a real solid draft for the Buffalo Bills. We'll then move on to Miami. So in the first round, Miami selected Charles Harris with the 22nd overall pick, the defensive end from Mizzou. I think this was a pretty good value pick. I certainly thought he'd go higher. I thought there'd be a bit more of a run on the pass rushes in the teens. So I think it's a perfectly decent pick there. Certainly in terms of pure pass rush, I think it's one of the better rushes in the draft. Not a huge fan of him as a prospect, in that my worry would be he's going to need to bulk up. I think at this point I can see Miami using him as a speed rush specialist on third downs, and that's perfectly fine. They've got William Hayes, they've got Cameron Wake there as base ends, so I think that's perfectly acceptable for the short term, and I think he will certainly give them a speed rush presence on those clear passing situations. And speed rushers, again, not many in this draft, and they are hard to find. Whether he can maintain that burst and speed rush ability once he starts bulking up in an NFL program, to me, will dictate how successful this guy can be for a first round pick. If that works out, great. I think it's a solid move. This is one of them spots where I thought Reuben Foster was certainly going to be considered due to the need at the linebacker position. But I think Harris is a perfectly acceptable pick. I think it's a decent range for him, and it's a pretty good team for him to go to, because he will not be expected to play every down right away. And I think learning from a guy like Cameron Wake, who's another undersized D-end, is a perfect opportunity. I think this is the best landing spot for the player. So in that respect, it's a real solid pick. I think this is probably a solid B if I had to grade it. Not that that's something I do. I'm not a huge fan of the whole grades. Raekwon McMillan with the 54th pick from Ohio State. I think this was the right kind of range for him. Lower end of the second, early third. I like him. I think I'm not so sure how he'll do in coverage early on. If he can develop that, then I think this is going to be a really, really good value pick. He plays the run pretty well. Gives them a bit more thump, which is something they've not got in that linebacking crew right now. And again, I just think this is a real solid pick. It addresses the need, and I think it's solid value. So no critique for them for this one. Then at 97, Cordrea Tankersley, the corner from Clemson. I'm not a huge fan of him on tape. I can get the value there. I think he's got a lot of talent. I didn't see enough of it on tape personally. I wasn't a big fan of his, but again, this feels a need. Someone I would expect to be seeing on the field for them at points this year. If he can develop, then this is going to be a great pick, but I'm a little bit dubious on this one. Then one of my favourite moves, and I'm not too familiar with a lot of these later round picks, but Isaac Asiata was someone I expected to go much, much earlier. The guard from Utah. I think this is one of the best late round picks of this draft. I think he's going to fit in perfectly in this offense. They can plonk him in at left guard. He's a decent run blocker. Gives them some youth there. It was a need, and I think this has addressed it very, very well. So, big fan of this selection. And beyond that, Devon Godshow, DT from LSU. More depth at DT, Vincent Taylor. So, yeah, definitely after some more. Again, not too familiar with him. And Isaiah Ford, the wide receiver from Virginia Tech. I guess he's dropped here because he ran poorly, but I thought he'd be off the board by this point. I think at one point I had him going sort of third or fourth round range. So I think it's good value. It's quite a deep group they've got in Miami, so I think he'll certainly have the chance to develop if he can make the roster. Hopefully for him he does. But I think this is potentially a high upside pick at that round. I think his tape is a lot better than you may expect from a 7th rounder. So pretty good selection there. I think this was a good draft. Again, address needs well. All of those first 4 picks, were positions that needed to be addressed, and I think they've done so. Asiata and McMillan are 2 guys I would expect to see starting from day one. They could play well for them. I think Harris is definitely a pick for the future. How much contribution they'll get from him in the rookie season, I'm not so sure. It can be difficult for pass rushers to get on the field too early in their careers. And Tankersley as well, I expect we'll see him at some point during the rookie season, but I think these are some really well thought out draft picks in terms of knowing what this roster needed and looking to address it. Whilst I'm, as I say, not a huge fan of Tankersley, I have issues with Harris. They are selections that made sense. So I think this was a very good draft. As I say, I could prefer the prospects a little more. But although that said, after Charles Harris, I'm not sure if I liked any of the options at that juncture this year. So yeah, good job, Miami. We'll see how it pans out, but this is a team that I think has got better from this draft. I've mentioned a few, like the Bears. I don't think this draft's made them any better. Even the Lions, I'm not sure they got much better out of it, whereas I think the Dolphins are better than they were last week. We will move on to the New England Patriots, the defending Super Bowl champions. I suppose this one will be nice and quick, not a huge amount of draft picks. In the draft previews, I've sort of spoke about the trades that they made. So Brandon Cooks was essentially their first round pick. Not going to find anyone better than him in all likelihood with the 32nd pick. So that was a smart trade. Coney Ealy I was a bit iffier on. So they moved down from the 2nd down into the 3rd to pick him up from the Panthers. We'll see whether that one works out, but I could see that going nowhere. He's had a lot of time to develop and he's only flashed a couple of times in his career. Definitely talented, but I'm not sure if he's a good football player at this point. And then with the 83rd pick, the Patriots selected Derek Rivers, defensive end from Youngstown State. This was a player I really liked. I could have seen him sneaking into the 2nd round. Very Patriots-esque pick because I think he's got some versatility to him. Could potentially have him stand up, potentially play with his hand in the dirt, so definitely fits the scheme. I think this was a really solid pick. Antonio Garcia, the offensive tackle from Troy. I do think they needed to get younger at tackle. I think it's a reasonable range for him. It wasn't a great class. They do a good job developing guys. I'm not sure it's a great pick, but it's perfectly fine. Dietrich Wise, another defensive end from Arkansas. Again, this makes sense. As I said in the draft review, this is a really loaded team at most positions, but the outside edges of the defence are a bit iffy. So see what happens here. And Connor McDermott with pick 211, offensive tackle from UCLA. And again, I think this is a similar situation. They know they need to get younger and get some more depth at the offensive tackle spot. It's not looking great there if they get a couple of injuries. This is someone, again, they will try and develop, and we'll see what happens there. If you factor in the trades out, and Dwayne Allen was the other trade. I like Dwayne Allen. If he can stay healthy, I think he could be a really, really dangerous second tight end for them. Factoring in the trades, this is a good draft. Clearly addressing, as I say, what I think is a solid roster. The 2 primary needs that I had, defensive end and offensive tackle. So I'll give the Patriots some credit for that. Of course, when you don't factor in the trades, it's incredibly underwhelming. Even with them, I'm not sure it's mind-blowing. Brandon Cooks is an exciting player. I'm not sure how much production they'll get from the other 2 guys. Dwayne Allen's definitely got a lot of upside though, so that one could certainly work out for them. So a pretty average haul, in my opinion, from the Pats. But let's face it, this is a good team. It doesn't necessarily need a huge amount of help at this point in time. Moving on to the final team in the AFC East, the New York Jets. So the first selection they made was Jamal Adams with the 6th pick out of LSU, the safety. This was considered one of the top prospects in the draft. I'm inclined to agree, even though I'd like to have seen a bit more production from him in coverage. This guy, in terms of an in-the-box safety, looks as good a prospect as we've seen in a while. By all accounts, the intangibles, this is a guy who's going to be a great dude to have in the locker room, could be a real leader on this team, and that's something I feel the Jets absolutely need. I think this was a very good selection. They've got big need at that spot. Calvin Pryor was being shopped throughout the draft. Apparently no one interested in picking him up, and based on last year's tape, that's not surprising. That secondary was shocking on pretty much every level for most of last season. So I think this is a really, really solid pickup. Probably the top player on a lot of people's boards. Most people had him as a top 5 prospect. The Jets just needed to go best player available. It looks like they've done that. I think on my board it would have been Jonathan Allen, but of course they don't need more D linemen. There's one thing they don't need, it's those. So yeah, this is a great selection. Good job there. 39, pick 39, I was surprised to see them go back to the well with safety and Marcus May from Florida. Now, whilst I think May's a good player, I did have some safeties rated above him. My question mark here is going for a second safety. Like, I understand you might feel you need 2, and it is a good draft for them. I feel there were some corners on the board that really could have helped, whether it was a guy like Sidney Jones or Fabian Moreau. Even though they may not help you short term, you are looking long term as when you're the Jets. Even someone with issues like Dalvin Cook, they need a running back as well. Don't forget, I think those were some of the top prospects on the board. Even some of the offensive linemen that were available. I think there were a lot of needs. I like May as a prospect, but we'll see how this one works out. I think it's a good player and it's a solid range for him, even if I preferred some of the other. I preferred Melifonwu, but yeah, certainly interesting from the Jets there. With the 79th pick, Darius Stewart, wide receiver from Alabama. They needed more receivers. This gives them a bigger body. Might be able to start right away. I mean, Quincy and them were really the only competition there, with Devin Smith, who I'm not sure would have offered a huge amount of competition based on what we've seen, but he's injured again and out for the year. So he's certainly going to have a chance to start early. It'll be hard to judge him early because I suspect this team's offense is going to be very poor next year. But solid pickup in this range. Chad Hansen at 141. I thought this was a good pick. I had him going in the 3rd in my mock, so I think this is good value. I think it's a possession type guy. I think he'll be better as a move slot type guy, but if they're used properly, they can be incredibly dangerous. Just look at New England over the years, and I often think long speed is somewhat overrated. This kid can play, so I think this is a solid selection. Again, doubling down on positions. What's their position need? Always a dubious one, but I think receiver is one where often guys will need some time to adjust. So when they eventually do get the quarterback and the offensive line, hopefully, if these two guys can develop that, those picks will look very good then. Jordan Leggett from Clemson as well. I thought this was another good pick. This was a really good tight end class. I thought Leggett was one of the more productive receiving tight ends in the draft. It may not have the upside of some of the guys that have been taken before him, but I think he's got better overall tape. I think this is a great range to pick him up in, so I thought this was a solid move. Again, maybe setting up to have weapons for whoever's the quarterback next season or the year after. In that regard, it might be a good one. Dylan Donahue, outside backer / defensive end from West Georgia. Not familiar with him. It was a position need. We'll see whether he contributes. Elijah Maguire, running back from Louisiana Lafayette. 3rd down back, pretty reasonable in this range. There are a lot of guys like that in this year's draft. Apparently he's one of the better ones. Not really seen too much of him on tape, so I'll talk about him at some point in the future. Definitely needed a running back, so need filled there. Jeremy Clark, corner from Michigan. ACL tear in September. Of course, that will drop his stock. We'll see if he comes back healthy. They have huge need at corner, so I'd suspect looking at the depth chart now, there's certainly a chance he'll, if he can recover well, be a contributor in 2018 and beyond. And Derek Jones, another corner from Ole Miss. Again, not a player I'm particularly familiar with. Corner was a big need, so again, doubling down on a position. Guy will be, I'm sure, have a chance in camp to make an impression. So this is one of the stranger drafts, because this is one of the teams that had so many needs that you can understand the going best player available. Maybe Marcus made that selection doubling down safety. Maybe it was a case of that, and they really did feel they needed to fill up both of those spots. I don't know if I'd necessarily be so quick to give up on Calvin Pryor. I thought last year I thought he was very poor, but I thought the year before that he was playing quite well. Maybe get a team that seemed a bit more cohesive defensively around him. Maybe give him another year. As I say, I would have liked to see them go corner here, get someone that, because whilst they've gone corner twice, they've done so late. So I don't know, and one of those guys isn't going to be playing this year. It's dubious to see whether they're going to be able to stop anyone. And I don't know if having two safeties learning in that environment where you don't have competent corners is a great one. The receivers, I like those selections. I think the weapons are certainly there, and they seem to be drafted with an eye for the future. For the short term, I do not think this draft helps the Jets. I don't necessarily think that's a huge problem outside of the front office and the coaching staff, who could certainly be gone at the end of this season, but potentially setting up well. As I say, I like the value with Hansen and Leggett. So a bit of an oddball draft. I like a lot of the players in it, so I'll edge towards it being a positive one for the Jets, even though I think, again, for 2017, I'm not sure it helps enormously. But we'll see what happens a couple of years down the line. This could end up being a solid foundational draft for what this team becomes. They've certainly got some talent now, at least, to look at and hopefully get going on that offensive side of the ball. So, overall, the AFC East, the Patriots alone make this a strange division. The Bills trading back and kind of what the Jets done. Some oddball drafts here. In terms of the drafts I like most, I'd probably say I liked the Bills draft the most. I liked picking up a first for next year. They could potentially be going into the QB market. Again, having two picks could be invaluable in terms of trading up for a guy like Sam Darnold or whoever else may be available, assuming they have good productive college seasons. And either way, having two firsts is always a good option. I think they addressed some needs well, got some impact starters. I've probably got the Dolphins just behind them for similar reasons. Probably prefer the Bills' picks overall as prospects, but I think, again, the Dolphins, they've got some guys that will step in, be able to contribute immediately, potentially some upside in the future. Behind that, I think Charles Harris could potentially be very good, but we'll see how he develops. As I say, he got a perfect landing spot. Then, if I consider the trades, probably the Patriots, just because Brandon Cooks, I think really, him and Dwayne Allen just really complete that cadre. They've got a bit more depth on the offensive line, which I think they needed. Still feel like they may potentially have problems with the pass rush, which could hinder them come playoff time, but I'm not sure what. I think that in terms of the options they had available, they did okay, but whether they're much better in that regard, I'm not so sure, for next season at least. And then the Jets, whilst I don't hate this draft, I think as I say, I like some of the players there. I think it's a solid one, but I don't think it helps them immediately. I'm not sure, frankly, that they could have had a draft that would make this team competitive next season. So, yeah, nothing outstanding for me in this division. Some pretty solid ones all round. Let me know what you guys think. Are you particularly happy with these drafts? If you're a fan of these teams, let me know, whether it's via the comment section below, Cover Zero Facebook, or whether you want to find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. I'll do my utmost to get back in touch with everyone who does make contact. Going to be finishing all of the divisions by the end of this week. At some point, I'm doing my top 100 list. I didn't expect them to air 2 last night. Those episodes, I was hoping they'd be up yesterday. Hopefully they'll be up over the next couple of days. I've got my top 100 list down now. I'm pretty happy with it. So check those out. If you've enjoyed it, check out, there's plenty of other stuff. Like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. It would be thoroughly appreciated. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always, and go Bucks.